Now, to get different theoretical perspectives on the U.S. economy, I was joined earlier by two very different guests, Don Boudreax and Richard Wolff. Don is a Libertarian professor of economics at George Mason University and a senior fellow at the Mercatus Center. And Richard Wolff is a visiting professor in international relations at the New School and an expert on Marxist economics. I asked both men the same questions and leave it to you as a viewer to discern which responses resonate with you. Up first is my interview with Don, who gives me his take on why only 1% of midterm voters see the economy as excellent and why the social mood in America seems pretty negative. Here's what he had to say.
It's clear to me that the economy is firing on all cylinders. The unemployment rate is declining, but the labor force participation rate is still quite low. And so that means a lot of people who would otherwise be working or be looking for jobs are still on the sidelines. I think it's because the economy is still very sluggish. People don't know what the effects of Obamacare are going to be. That's a very unpopular program, by the way. People don't know what the full effects of Dodd-Frank are going to be. All this regulatory uncertainty that hangs over the economy, I think, is keeping it still very sluggish. The data we get are indeed encouraging, but I think by this time, after the recession started in December of '07, right? This is 7 years ago now. We should have been far, far along in recovery, further along than we are now.
Right. You know, I want to talk to you about things like Obamacare from a certain tack. You know, it's good to talk to you about, you know, in terms of a libertarian market-based kind of view. The sense that I'm getting from people, regardless of their political affiliation, is that there's a certain sense that corporatism is the problem. And you know, when I talk about corporatism, I'm basically mean the nexus of big business on the one side and big government on the other side getting together and doing what they want to do.
It is a problem
for themselves. You know, that's the antithesis of the classic market economy. I mean, what's your view on how that's affecting the mood?
I think it's important to say that the market, being pro-market, is not being pro-business. Being pro-market is being pro-consumer, pro-free choice. Businesses, of course, want to guide the market. They want to corral the market for their own selfish purposes. We should stop that. Government, of course, is the biggest agent allowing businesses to do that. When people see this happening, and certainly it has happened more since 2008, people get discouraged. It does look like the big wigs. It does look like the big shots. It does look like the tycoons are rigging the game in their favor. To a certain extent, they are. Fortunately, I think we still have a lot of actual entrepreneurial dynamism in the economy somewhere that we can escape from that if given the chance.
Well, you know, let me give you a specific example that I was looking at here. Let me take a look at this question. Here's something that's interesting. What about now? Well, let's go back to the corporatism and the lobbyists. I'm thinking about the telecom industry here. Supposedly 96% of houses in America actually only have at most 2 telecom providers for broadband access, which is pretty ridiculously low if you think about it. So that's not a market economy where you have one firm competing against the next. What should government do about that, if anything? How do you fix that problem if you think that it's a problem?
I think government should just get out of the way. Government should have no rules or restrictions on who can supply broadband, who can't supply broadband. Let consumers choose. Let entrepreneurs who want to enter that industry enter, no matter where, no matter on what scale, however small, however large. Let the competitive market sort it out. Get rid of all these regulations that try to guide how government bureaucrats and academics think it should look. Let the market sort it out in competition.
Well, it sounds good on the surface, but now what about the fact that we already had in the cable industry, we already had a monopoly that was basically entrenched by government regulation, and that's already pre-existing. How do you deal with the fact that that exists, and that means that you only have 1 or 2 players in broadband irrespective?
Look, I think if you get rid of those protections, the market will take care of it. Yeah, the companies that have the protections now have a certain slight advantage, but in order to maintain competitive viability in a market like ours. You have to continue to innovate. You have to be genuinely innovative. You have to genuinely serve consumers. So just get rid of the restrictions, get rid of the special privileges, and things will sort themselves out.
And get rid of the lobbyists.
If government stops doling out special privileges, the lobbyists will go away. No one is going to pay a lobbyist to seek special privileges that can't be gotten.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about wages here. I want to talk about this thing called nominal downward wage rigidity. Now, people talk about wages going down as a solution to unemployment. Luckily, the jobs picture, as you were saying, is picking up, and
compared to how it was a few months ago.
How it was a few months ago. But you know, my problem with the concept of wages going down as a solution is that on the one hand, it suppresses the consumption, but on the second hand, you have this downward wage rigidity, which means that in general, you're not going to get there irrespective. How do you deal with that problem in terms of unemployment as a problem in an economy?
This is a really big issue. It's a really big, and there's no way it can be covered in the short time that we have here. First of all, I would say that it's not necessarily true that if wages fell, it would depress consumption. If wages fell and the employment stimulus was great enough, it might actually increase household consumer spending. So you know, you have that aspect to look at. Also, one reason, we have to ask, why are wages downwardly inflexible? Why won't they fall?
Right.
Part of the reason is because people have this expectation built in that if they hold out against cutting wages, that the monetary authority and the government in other ways will accommodate those expectations. I don't know what would happen if we changed those expectations and we allowed wages to fall as they would in order to clear labor markets better than labor markets are being cleared now. Back in the 19th century, early 20th century, wages were much more downwardly flexible than they are today. And when we had a recession, such as the recession of or depression of 1920, 1921, wages were allowed to fall. They did fall, and employment was restored much more quickly than it was in the Great Depression of 1930s, and in this most recent Great Recession, as we call it.
I'd love to have that's a whole other show, but I'd love to talk about the difference between 1920 and 1929, because I think that's a big debate that people are starting to revisit now today.
Yeah, I'll put in a plug for James Grant's book, so the Forgotten Depression.
Excellent.
It's on this topic. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, what about the minimum wage? The literature is pretty inconclusive on whether a small increase in the minimum wage depresses unemployment. What's your view on that?
I think it's unquestionable that a minimum wage reduces the employment prospects of low-skilled workers. It's very hard to detect in the data for a number of reasons. Number one, we have a $15 trillion economy. There's a lot going on.
Right.
Only about 2.5% of the American workforce earn the minimum wage. And so when you have this giant economy and such a small portion of the workforce, there are many, many things going on that affect the employment prospects of low-skilled workers beside the level of the minimum wage. In my view, the most careful studies, and there's just a recent one that came out, the most careful studies do detect an employment effect on the minimum, a negative employment effect of the minimum wage. Look, it's common sense. If you raise the cost of engaging in some activity, such as employing low-skilled workers, the people who employ low-skilled workers will employ fewer of them.
That was Don Boudreax, professor of economics at George Mason University and senior fellow at the Mercatus Center. Time now for a quick break, but stick around, because when we return, Richard Wolff, author and visiting professor at the International Affairs School of the New School, discusses his take on corporatism